I don't want to be an MC. It's not my business. I don't want to be
Alright everybody, that's not a good way to start. I gotta start it a little more serious. Welcome back to the Defying Yourself podcast. I'm here with my best friend Nathanael Horton. He offered to do a little mini podcast about his story of resilience, and I thought, why the hell not? Why not break it out, try to do it? Nathanael, do you have anything to say for yourself to start?
Well, thank you for that introduction, Kit. I'd be happy to share my story of resilience and fortitude and the errors I've made and the learning that has come out of that and how I'm reaching for success in the end.
Nice.
So
Nice.
I would like to ask you, though, who was the artist of that song in the intro?
So I actually don't know. I was in the middle of telling you that it's royalty-free music that I found on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the story behind that is I don't have to pay anybody to use it. And I don't have to have any sort of creativity or talent within myself to use it for the purpose of my podcast.
To make music, because you're not a musician.
Yeah,
But you have lots of talent.
I have lots of talent, but not musically. I thought about trying to piece something together, but there's no way it would have sounded as good as what you just heard. And then you probably didn't pick up the audio that was... Did you hear a man talking?
I missed that part.
Yeah, I think you were focused on my cat in that moment. But it's a recording from Charlie Chaplin, who's doing a speech in a movie called The Dictator. And he has a particularly rousing moment. This is fine. See, if the cat's playing in the background, that's real life. And real life deserves to be captured in audio format and not just perfectly pristine moments.
Yeah, here are the treats in reserve for when I want the cat's attention.
But do you see this? So just real quick before getting into the serious stuff, she has a little ball. So she has this contraption that has like a ball in it. And if she's high on catnip, it makes her want to attack the ball. So that's like a little move she has, I guess.
Hey, when I get high on catnip, I always want to go for the balls,
Yeah. I'm high on human catnip right now.
Oh, yeah?
Known as marijuana. But I typically don't scratch. I'm more of a type of guy that would go for like an In-N-Out burger or maybe, some video games.
Well, I just took a gummy, so I'll catch up soon.
Yeah, we also took an edible. I thought that tasted really good. That tasted like something right out of the sweets section.
Yeah, I love living in California.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, shit. So the whole reason why I'm doing this podcast, and I guess I could use this as a moment to explain to Nathanael and maybe even to myself of why I want to begin these audio recordings. And when I come to think about the defining things in my life, the number one thing is that I have a disability. I have something called cerebral palsy that limits the muscle function in my legs and makes it difficult for me to walk. It's a lifelong struggle that I've been through, not only physically, but also mentally as well. And these ramifications and these consequences have been far-reaching into like the social, the emotional, I would even go as far as to say like the relational, the cultural. And I think the story of people who are disabled or people who are suffering from a chronic illness isn't always told in a way that you would expect, because you see the outward facing consequences, the limp, you see the person with the cane or the person in the wheelchair, but you don't often understand the struggle that's going on inside their mind. And I can only speak for myself. Nathan, you probably don't know about this, but I'm just going to talk about a podcast that I heard recently that inspired me to get into podcasting was actually Logan Paul's podcast with his... Logan Paul is a YouTuber. I'm just going to explain real quick for you. And he has a sidekick who's featured in his videos, whose name is Evan. I don't recall his last name right now. But Evan is a dwarf. He is a little person.
right? That's
Yeah.
the parlance.
And he came on to, that's right. In fact, he actually specifically talked about how the M word, the M as in midget, is considered.
I thought you were going to say musketeer.
No, the M word as in midget is considered very offensive. And
like a slur or something.
literally, it's the N word of the little people world. But
not to be confused with the N word.
The M word or the N word. Right. But I'm talking about the M word as in midget, which I'm only using that here for educational purposes, but I will not demonstrate the other word.
Yeah, we're not
for
going to
that
say
same. Yeah. But no, to be serious though, for real, like, so Evan talks in that podcast about the mental health ramifications and consequences of being different and of not having the same abilities or not having the same health as everyday people. And Evan is 22, and I really identified with a lot of what he was going through because at that point in my life, I was pretty much in the gutter, almost physically and certainly mentally. I was struggling with depression, anxiety.
Like how old were you?
Like when I was 22, like when I was his age. This was a period of my life where I was just about to or had just had spinal fusion operation. And another thing that Evan and I have in common is that he had that operation as well.
Spinal fusion, that doesn't sound fun.
No, Nathanael, it was not fun. It was a surgery I had on my back where, believe it or not, I was filleted like a fish. They cut me open, and they basically turned me into Wolverine. We were talking about X-Men earlier today. Wolverine has metal for bones, or he is just metal as it is. And I'm sort of like him now. In fact, I think of myself as a cyborg sometimes because I have metal rods and screws in my spine that really, really hurt to have. But it was an important operation because it straightened out my spine. But back to Evan, he also had that surgery. So it was a really raw podcast. And if anyone's interested in these same sort of ideas, the things that normal people go through with their mental health, and when I say normal, obviously that's far-reaching, and that could mean a bunch of different things depending on whose perspective you're looking at from. But to me, anyone who's normal is someone who doesn't need a cane to walk around, or someone who doesn't get tired after they walk for 20 minutes, or stuff like this, or someone who isn't in like regular pain. So Logan's podcast with his friend Evan, although it was kind of raw and difficult to watch sometimes, it, I think, felt for me that it opened up a whole new realm of discussion. Maybe not that podcast, but the way it resonated with me was such that I want to tell my story. And not only that, is I want my friends to tell their stories. And I don't know if anybody is ever going to listen to this on YouTube or SoundCloud, but if you have a story...
No, I'll listen to it.
Sure, I'm sure you will. I'm talking about the viewer, the listener, the unseen, the potential audience. If you have a story as well of not only your resilience, but your struggle that you want to share or you want to talk about, hit me up. Send me a message. Leave me a comment. I don't know exactly what the avenues for that would be, but I've talked a little bit about my struggle so far. We're going to try to go for about half an hour, so we're about to hit 10 minutes. And I wanted to ask you, Nathanael. I really want to say super quickly that I met Nathanael working at a Minecraft summer camp.
Yeah, that's right.
And he's a person who, literally within knowing him for an hour, I think I already loved him in some weird way. And I just, not romantically, but just as a friend, because I just respected him so damn much. And maybe after he talks a little bit, I can talk about my first interactions with him and why they were so interesting. But at this point, I wanted to ask Nathanael, what's your story of resilience? Like, what are you going through? What's your struggle? And like, what are some tips? Because I don't ever want this just to be about like complaining or being upset. Like, I really want this to be about tips to help people learn to improve their life, live with pain, defy themselves, and beat the struggle. I know that's a huge introduction, but go ahead, Nathanael.
Well, I believe it was Friedrich Nietzsche, who said,
Nice.
Well, he wrote in German, but translated to English would be, what doesn't kill you only makes you stronger, or something to that effect. And I reflect on that from time to time because Nietzsche is one of my favorite philosophers. And he actually knew pain quite intimately. He was a writer, philosopher, philologist, actually. Bonus points if you know what a philologist is.
I don't.
Well, a philologist is someone who reads, studies, interprets Greek texts, I believe.
Nietzsche did that.
That's how he started in Switzerland as a philosopher, and that's what he focused on. Later on, his writings became, different. He evolved as a philosopher, but he also changed in terms of his health. He actually started experiencing a lot of pain, and he died a premature death. He actually went insane, and he could no longer, express himself as a philosopher in the great mind that he was, which must have been torturous for him, I can only imagine. There were all sorts of speculation as to why he died and how he died that early, but they exhumed his body a number of years ago, and they discovered that he actually had a massive brain tumor.
Whoa.
And that was untreatable at the time, much less diagnosed. So he had an immense amount of pressure in his head, and he turned to drugs.
Really?
He had access in Europe at that time, was exploring the world, and all sorts of new drugs were coming to Europe. And there are anecdotal accounts of things like this. I studied this at college a bit. I was curious about the interaction between drugs, philosophy, and writing, particularly philosophers' writing.
Real quick, is there any evidence or anything to suggest that part of the reason why he was so smart is because that tumor kind of, I don't know, for some reason when you were saying that, I was thinking about like maybe it forced him to think harder, or that stress level kind of pushed his thinking, or are those two unrelated?
Well, that's what I'm getting at. Yeah, the stress on his body forced him to, for example, find a place that he was comfortable to live. And he decided that the mountains of Switzerland would be his new home. And to walk in the mountains and the majesty of the Alps really influenced his philosophy. And he actually would write about his philosophizing exercises and his practice. And he would say things like, when I was at such and such rock that I stop at from time to time, I had the great idea that I wrote about. So he was intimately involved with the landscape around him, and it helped his health. He lived kind of like a hermit in a house, which I'd like to visit someday. But I think you nailed it, Kit. He became more frantic, pressured to get his ideas out before he died. He wrote his own autobiography of sorts, Why I Am So Clever, which is a hilarious
Is that really
read.
what it's called?
Yes, that's the title of the book. He also wrote Human, All Too Human. He wrote Thus Spoke Zarathustra. I messed up the pronunciation there, but
No worries.
those are some of his
I can fix
more
that in
famous
post.
works.
Go ahead.
Great. And I identify with him on some level because, first of all, I love his ideas, which there are too many to talk about right now.
He said that God is dead.
Yes, he did say that. Which has all sorts of meanings. For example, maybe not taken literally, God is dead, which would kind of clash with the idea of immortality, I would suppose, if you want to believe in that aspect of God. But intellectually, he was talking more about the rise of science and that the spell that the church had over Europe, and particularly divinity anywhere, could be challenged by science as a new paradigm for thinking and for authority and organization of communities.
It's deep. It's deeper than just denouncing God itself. It's sort of saying something about the society that is favoring scientific progress and things like logic over, these older ideas. But I think I steered you off track a little bit. I did want to get back to, you said that you identify with this guy.
Right.
And could you go into a little bit more detail why? Because I can say just hearing you speak right now, I've always thought that even though I have a disability and it's weighed really hard on my mind, that it has kind of pressured my mind, so to speak. And I wouldn't go as far as to say that I'm so clever, but I do think that I have a good wit about me, a good mind about me, which I can enact onto the world
You
that
do, yeah.
I may not have had if not for the limitations that I have physically. So how about you?
Right. So going back to my opening statement of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, there's kind of a caveat to that. It makes you stronger or you die. And secondly, another corollary would be, it doesn't mean your suffering ends or even diminishes. Your suffering could actually increase in various ways. And you have to become stronger to enable yourself to continue living or even be happy. So it's something that pops into my mind now and then when I've experienced something difficult or traumatic or just had a shitty day. And there's a certain comfort in that statement because it reminds you that there is hope to continue, and you should continue in a way that is healing and does make you stronger, so you can surmount not just your physical, mental, emotional, spiritual challenges, but thrive and take on new challenges that don't define you like a disability can.
Wow. I think you just laid out a bunch of really deep ideas. Now, I was talking to a therapist the other day, and she said something to me that I at first dismissed.
Mm-hmm.
And she told me that to overcome some feelings of depression and rumination that I experienced, that I should practice a form of meditation that means that you're super aware and sensitive of the sensory things around you. She gave me an example. If you're walking through the park and you feel the wind on your skin, or you feel the sun and it feels a little warm and it feels good. And I know for a fact that you, Nathanael, have said stuff like this to me in the past, which is, I think, a pretty radical notion in our current state of society or culture or whatever you want to say, which is that people always say, oh, enjoy the moment. But I feel like it goes beyond enjoying the moment. It's enjoying it, but almost feeling infinite in the moment, if that makes any sense, which is like, you can literally be sitting and maybe it's sunset and it's really warm and you're with some friends and you're all having a good conversation and drinking some beer and everything's okay in that moment. And you can exist in that moment.
Right. And
you can just be sitting there in that moment of happiness and be like, hey, it's okay. Like, this is good. This is love. This is real. Like, this is... Now, unfortunately, those things aren't necessarily helpful when you're confronting serious illness or financial problems, but what I am trying to say is that you can experience love and joy in the present moment, and that may not fix everything that's wrong, but it's almost like a respite from I heard someone who was talking about TM, transcendental meditation. It was like the gotta mind, which is like, I gotta do this, I gotta call this person, I gotta pay this bill, I gotta go here, I gotta go to work, I gotta do this. So our mind is constantly inundated with things that we gotta do.
Right.
And it sounds so quaint and it sounds so simple, but even something simple as sitting here talking to my friend and visiting him in this moment, that I can manifest some sense of not only joy, but like a completeness and a feeling of a unity that's almost like transcendent beyond the legitimate suffering that I experience. I just went off on a little rant there, but go ahead, Nathanael. What do you got?
I wouldn't call it a rant. I'd call it a wonderful example of flow and expository speaking.
You're right.
On the cuff. Excellent. Well, yeah, let me respond to a few things there. You said, to encapsulate some of what you said, you talked about, like, in a word, mindfulness, being present. But it's easy to just say that word or those words, and they're kind of catchphrases, right? We can sort of know what each other's talking about, but there's different flavors of mindfulness, different techniques, different levels, experiences, kinds of mindfulness, and being present. Well, what does that mean, being present? It doesn't really give you an instruction manual to just say that. I mean, people have different ideas what that is. I recently have been reading a book called Walks to the Edge of Thought, or something to that effect. On the cover is a photo of Gödel and Einstein taking a walk in Princeton, New Jersey, where they were both professors after fleeing Europe because of the war and such. So I mention that because in the opening chapter, there's a very interesting discussion, intricate discussion about the problem of time in physics. And one solution that the physicists came up with is there is no time.
Well,
Meaning it's very much a human construction as far as we phenomenologically experience it, that it's useful to have things in the past, present, and future. Nature made it that way, so not everything happens all at once, is how the book put it. And being present, as you mentioned, if you're on the beach with your friends, it's warm, you have the smell, your sensory experience, and then your conscious attention's toward that experience. That's a lot of words to explain the fact that you're enjoying yourself, and your experience of it is very vivid. You like it, and it makes you feel very anchored in what we call the present,
right.
moment to moment. And it's interesting, if you keep trying to divide those moments down, you could just keep dividing. There is no present, per se.
Wow. So a couple things was running through my mind. I wanted to talk about two different situations. The first one involves you specifically, just because you're sitting here, is when I went to your wedding, and we were at your wedding reception.
Okay.
And we had just enjoyed a wonderful vegan spread. How about that?
That's right.
A vegan wedding. And I was sitting there feeling so full and content in that moment. And Nathanael walks up to me and says, "Do you want to smoke a joint outside?" And I think we just stood out there smoking a joint.
Do you remember what happened while we were smoking?
That random girl walked up to us.
She's pretty cute.
Some girl walked up to us and tried to smoke it. Or something like that.
Well, she was on her way to a Narcotics Anonymous meeting at the church annex next door.
That's right. But this is what I think Nathanael was saying, is that in this moment, I can, even though I'm sitting here in Davis, California, I can almost teleport back to 2 or 3 years ago, I think it was, to Nathanael's wedding reception, and just that feeling of just being friends and smoking a joint. Like it's so small, but it's almost like I can thrive within these moments. Another one I wanted to talk about is a little bit more.
Well, before you go
ahead.
I wanted to add to the story. Not only was this young woman going to a Narcotics Anonymous meeting, we chatted a bit with the three of us, and she quickly learned, because we told her that it was my wedding, and she congratulated me, and she gave me a certain look and a bat of her eyes, and that's when I really understood what it meant to be a married man.
Oh wow! So you kind of, in that moment, you felt like a hot commodity, like you were freshly locked up, and she kind of,
And I'll leave the story there. It was a wonderful wedding, and I've been married almost 2.5 years now.
That's right, and that actually really was a good wedding. Although I will say I wanted a cheeseburger afterwards. But actually, the next story, just to link that in, is actually about cheeseburgers. I went on a birthday vacation with my girlfriend Taylor, who's in the other room trying to be quiet because we're recording, and I love her for that. But we were in Las Vegas, and it was a beautiful October night in Las Vegas, and we went to Shake Shack. Now, anybody who knows me knows that I love a cheeseburger, and it was the first time I had ever been to Shake Shack, and I gotta tell you, sitting there enjoying that Shake Shack on the Las Vegas Strip, again, it may seem petty because we're talking about a cheeseburger here, but this is a small moment of bliss, and it was so vivid to me in that moment to be with a woman that I loved and eating a cheeseburger I also loved, to feel complete and to feel real and to feel like I don't need more. And for me, because I do feel like I'm so fundamentally different than most people I ever encounter, like I experience a lot of envy in my life, and I go here to UC Davis, and I see all kinds of beautiful, healthy people. And I don't say that from a resentful standpoint, but just, I see how good they have it, or how good they appear to have it in comparison. And I think when I can think back and draw from these moments of love and satisfaction and joy, that's just one tool of many for us that we can draw on when we are suffering, when we do feel different, that maybe could bring us a little bit of respite. But I think the more that we go into this conversation, it's sort of like a never-ending ball of yarn, much like how you were saying, there is no present. It's just a never-ending segments of. Is that what you're saying? Like we can access never-ending segments of joy and bliss. Is that kind of what you're getting at? Maybe I just misunderstood.
It is actually, exactly. In any given moment, you can experience love and joy, etc. For example, you mentioned your friends at the beach, and set and setting, to borrow a phrase from the psychedelic realm. You have a good set and setting there, so it is easier to get into that state. It feels more natural, perhaps. But you also mentioned like paying bills and taxes and stuff. Well, I've struggled with that too, as anybody who's paid those things. And I read an interesting book. I think it was You Can Heal Yourself. It's a very famous book about these sort of topics. And yeah, it causes a lot of stress, not just the stress of seeing your bank account get lower when you pay everything, but definitely. To actually make that money in the first place and
to give it all out after you get it.
Exactly. And who knows how much stress you go through. I just quit a job. It was very stressful, helping take care of people with dementia, Alzheimer's, and such. So 7.5 months at that job, I was ready for my next job, which would be teaching mindfulness and meditation to middle school and high school students at UC Berkeley. So during summer camp there. So, but to get back to what you said, I was saying it's easier to get into a mindful, joyful state, let's say, when you're with your friends at the beach.
Certainly. And
having a good time. Part of the practice, that is any kind of meditation, mindfulness practice, is to be able to get into that state when things perhaps aren't as comfortable.
Right.
So I mentioned that book. Oh, it's Louise Hay's You Can Heal Your Life or something like that. She mentions, the stress from paying bills and taxes. And she suggests to reorient your thinking, your attitude about it. For example, this is a slight exaggeration, but something like, I'm so glad I can pay my bills because I really enjoyed the service it gave me, all the water I used to wash myself, all the water I used to dilute my pee and send it down the drain so it doesn't stagnate in my toilet bowl.
Nice. Great.
I can make it a little silly, but even the taxes, like, I'm glad that I'm contributing to society, and, well, maybe that's all I can say about taxes.
Right.
That are good. But reorienting your thinking about it and checking your attitude, checking your entitlement, perhaps, being grateful is possible at any moment.
Right.
Of course, you could come up with counterexamples,
sure,
but for the purposes of this
discussion. When the rubber meets the road and bad shit is happening in your life and you're in a depressive state, if someone comes along and goes, "Hey, just think about when you were with your friends at the beach," it's like, well, gee, thanks.
But even if you can achieve that, it only make you maybe have a faded sense of joy for a minute at that, and then it's back to the depression channel. So you raise an interesting point.
Yeah, but I did just want to say real quick on that, that at the same time, and so I just laid out the pessimistic viewpoint, which I'm sure most people would think of, and I would certainly jump to at a younger age, if not today. But I would say when you do have those moments of like, wow, I felt so proud when I did this at my job, or I felt so proud when I dated that girl, or whatever, when I finished this project, or it's like these are our victories. You know what I mean? These are like our literal psychological victories. They're like our trophies.
Epic wins, yeah.
Epic wins. They're like these trophies that we have that it's almost like, okay, I could die penniless, but at least I did that. And how many people throughout history did great things who had a horrible end, like Nietzsche, for example, or freaking Napoleon, he was banished or whatever. Not to say Napoleon was a good guy. I know that he did a little bit of like mass murder and things like that. But
brilliant tactician, though.
Yeah, I'm not sure how well that extends as a metaphor towards my personal struggle, but I did just want to say that, like, yeah, it is quaint. It is perhaps, it's easy to say when you're just sitting in a room, but if there was like a bereaved parent or someone who's lost a spouse, it's like sometimes the hard fact of the matter is you just have to eat shit and you have to bear the brunt of an extreme psychological pain and a torment. But
on that point,
go ahead.
I'd like to add something to that. It sounds like a philosophy of Stoicism, which also comes from Greek culture, and it tends to be that men are more stoic than women. Women tend to express themselves more, have more girlfriends or any friends to communicate their distress or their need to vent. And men tend to, as you said, kind of suck it up, take it, bear it, stiff upper lip, all those kind of metaphors that are very evocative, because stiff upper lip kind of suggests a tension, right?
Yeah.
Like a muscular tension in a certain pose and a certain... And I wanted to segue to what disability I have, because we haven't mentioned that yet. Would you want to intro that?
I do, but I wanted to just identify with what you said, is that's how I live my life. I put it all on my shoulders. As much as I can feel resentful or spiteful towards anyone else, the number one victim of myself is myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always just thought I had to bear the brunt of it. One thing I think that does help as far as giving tangible, real feedback to people who are listening, because that's why I want to make this. It's not just for myself, but it's like, what service can I be to the world? And one thing I am good at is talking and dealing with a lot of hardship.
Mm-hmm.
So if I can create that into an MP3 file or whatever, and if it helps even a couple people, like, to me that would just seem so cool. But Nathanael has been a special friend to me. I feel like I could segue in just now that you said that. Actually, I met Nathanael at a Minecraft summer camp, like I said, and I guess I won't go too deep into it because I don't want to. I was just hesitating there because I don't want to relay exactly what you told me.
Go as deep as you want, kid. I trust you.
One of the first things that Nathanael told me was one of the most heaviest and gut-punching of a introductory statement that I've ever heard from another person. And when I say that, I don't say that to like put you on the spot or embarrass you,
right? Or
to like
more profound, maybe.
It's just that you were going through something in that moment. Is that you were alive and you were present in that moment. And like I said, I loved you from that moment and maybe the first hour that we have worked together, because normal people are afraid to be real about what's going on in their life. And when I say normal people, again, that's a very vague term to use, but your average person is afraid to be that frank, especially with a stranger. And I don't know if you would have said that to anybody, or maybe that you were just waiting to say that to me. And that sounds kind of deep.
Destiny.
That's kind of deep.
Destiny, kid.
Right. Well, maybe it was. So anyway, I will say this. I don't want to use his exact words because they were that heavy, but I will say that he told me that he was very sick and very unwell, and that he had just received some very dire news from a doctor.
Yeah, I was crying.
And he was crying, and he looked physically ill. But at the same time, he was incredible to watch. This guy is a tutor, and he's teaching kids how to use Minecraft.
Well, tell him where it was.
It was at, what's the name of that?
Maker Faire in San Mateo.
Maker Faire in San Mateo, which is a big convention of people who just make little, not little at all, like big robots and robotics and STEM type of stuff. And we were...
Well, I also add, San Mateo is mid-peninsula of San Francisco Peninsula in the Bay Area. So this is Silicon Valley, a lot of cool stuff.
This is like the tech area of the tech area doing the tech stuff.
For fun. It was kind of carnival atmosphere.
And I just ran in, exactly. It was a lot of fun. I just ran into Nathanael and I started working with him. And
what were we doing?
We were helping kids play Minecraft because they were all set up with computers, and that was the attraction for the company that we worked for at the time. Their whole goal was to get people to sign up for their mailing list so they could get them to register for summer camp or something like that. Nathanael had the advantage over me of actually knowing how to play Minecraft, and I somehow was in the how should I say, like, the bad situation of not knowing anything about Minecraft, but working at a Minecraft summer camp.
You pretty well. I had no idea. Didn't know Minecraft.
I know video games, so I could just about suss out any game.
It's first person, etc.
Yeah, but I will say that Minecraft itself, I never took to it, and it doesn't have any type of nuances that are interesting to me. Or I'll say that not only are they're interesting to me, but they kind of eluded me. So anyway, with that was a real long introduction. But I did want to say, Nathanael is someone I've always really not only loved, but kind of admired and look up to for what he's about to talk about. Is that he's going through something and going through a struggle, and that it inspires me. Like, it's not only someone I can relate to, but it's like someone who inspires me as well. So why don't you tell your version of what you told me that day and what you were going through?
Right. So I met you at the Maker Faire that summer, and it was the beginning of the summer, and before we actually taught the summer camps, the Minecraft summer camps that we were coworkers, we had this demo basically at the Maker Faire. So we had a bunch of tables set up and laptops. Every kid got a laptop. We had like 25 at least. It was a good number, so we could reach a lot of kids at one time. And there was no charge to play, and kids, instantly recognized Minecraft. And we got some pretty young kids, and some that had never played before. And I had the joy and the privilege to teach them the controls and show them cool stuff they could do, as well as even introduce them to actually how to use a computer. Some of them were that young. How to use a keyboard. What's a mouse? It's the tablet generation.
Yeah, I remember that.
So I'm very patient, and I have experience teaching Minecraft because my previous job was at a Silicon Valley startup that focused on teaching kids how to code. And one of my ideas was, hey, let's use a mod of Minecraft that teaches them coding in-game. And so to achieve that, we had a bunch of Chromebooks at this job, which were the desktop variety. So they're super cheap off Amazon and stuff. But they have no local hard drive, so you can't install Minecraft. So I ended up finding out online how to hack the Asus Chromebooks.
I didn't know this part.
And I put Linux on all the machines, a lightweight version of Linux. I had to test which version would be the most lightweight. I couldn't use the standard out-of-the-box Linux. And I installed Minecraft on all of them and hooked them up to our local area network. And I designed a Minecraft summer camp curriculum that I taught at this startup company in San Mateo. And I also I was the general manager after being a tutor there for a while. Computer code coach, as they call them. And to get to my disability, I worked there maybe a year and change, and I totally burned myself out.
Right.
I had just turned 30 about there, and I still wanted to steam full ahead with kind of a manic, maybe more hypomanic, kind of just put my full energy, heart, and attention in it.
Yeah.
And I even stopped going to part-time to college because at a Catholic university studying philosophy and mysticism because I didn't have the time. I got promoted and I'd never had a salary before, and it was going to change my life. So I got burnt out of that job, answering emails at all hours, doing a lot of the, administrative work. That's the word I was looking for. Administrative work to set appointments, and kids' schedules change all the time.
Right.
And then payments for subscriptions for the classes.
Sounds horrible. Like too much work.
Well, I loved it while I could do it. Yeah. That's the thing, and I was happy to do it. I just also mentioned hiring and had to fire a couple of people, at least one person. And I also did marketing for them. I experimented with Facebook ads and different kinds of posters and window displays and word of mouth, asking for people to commit positive Yelp reviews if they were happy. I increased the enrollment for that school from about 60 students to well over 200.
Really?
Between that was concurrent enrollment between our school at this small office in San Mateo and nearby elementary schools where we did kind of like satellite off-campus classes in the classroom. So I had the opportunity to teach many different places, real classrooms, let's say, and then our classroom, which I furnished exactly how I wanted it, and it was a beautiful project for me. I even put, if anyone remembers from the 90s, the screensaver of the flying toasters.
I do.
I put that screensaver on every single machine we had. We had like 30 machines. And it was a little bit of a challenge to do it with Linux and then do it with Mac, but I figured it all out. Mac had a version you could actually buy, and it was easy to set up. But Linux, I discovered I needed to use a screensaver version of it, meaning when the... Anyway, not to get too geeky on you. I want to move the story forward. I mean, I'll just show you how much I really loved computers from a young age, and I'm a total gamer. So
That's appropriate. And think of it, those kids would have never seen that classic toaster background if not for your efforts there.
One kid one day asked me, why is there a flying toaster on the screens? And
So you're about to learn today.
and I told him, what do you think? And that's how I taught, Socratically, you know?
I see.
Yeah.
Oh, all right.
It's a way to instill joy and wonder and to be present while you're enjoying the aesthetic uniqueness that is a flying toaster
And
in cyberspace.
I did notice that when you were working at the Minecraft camp, is that it wasn't just about telling the kids what to do, it was about inspiring a sense of creativity within themselves. And now,
Exploring.
I'm a huge critic of video games and
Me too.
the effect that they have on not only other people but myself. But I do think that in this instance, Nathanael, you did really make it into a legitimate learning opportunity. But things started to happen to you where all this work that you were taking on, all this great progress that you were taking on, things started happening with you.
Unravel.
And your story is a little different than mine because I've lived my whole life with something like this.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's something that you see in me, where you see in me someone who's dealt with it a whole life, where it's emergent, it's just emergent within you. So I could imagine having a healthy body and then steadily not, or moving into a more unhealthy state could be quite distressing. So I'd be interested to hear more about that.
Okay, I can continue by saying that you're right. You make a good point when you say you lived with it a certain amount of time and
All time,
uh,
for me at least.
for that, yeah. And prolonged suffering is very difficult. I've had chronic pain and what I'll loosely call fibromyalgia. And to sum that up, fibromyalgia kind of means we don't know what the hard science is. We can't help you with exactly what's going wrong with you because we don't understand it. And I can tell you some of the symptoms I experience. With the chronic pain, I have the sensation that I'm being kind of like, not to be over the top, but kind of like poked, stabbed up and down my back on my right side, pretty exclusively near the top of my spine, neck, back pain. And I've been suffering from this for 10 years. And it started off low under my right shoulder blade, I think because I gamed way too much. I was very addicted. I don't use that term lightly. I was very compulsive about it. And it was an important escape for me from, for example, problems of depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, poor social skills, and being way too glued to a screen, to a monitor, to a whole cornucopia of games, a whole slew of games ranging from real-time strategy to first person to, you name it. Lane defense, I started with Dota 2 and then I have over 1,000, maybe 300 hours in Dota 2. So,
My God.
I meant to say I started with Heroes of Newerth and went to Dota 2.
I
That's
see.
what I meant to say.
That's important to get
It's
that.
an important distinction. They're very
Yeah.
different games.
I see.
But I was part of an online community. We used headsets. We had TeamSpeak server, and they were my real friends. I never saw them. I didn't know most of their first names, but it was a place that I felt safe. And my go-to game was EVE Online, and I played that for about 10 years until I deleted my account last year, and all my assets. And I made a new character with the name. I won't say the name online per se. That's a secret.
I see. Yeah.
That's my alias. But I'll tell you later.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
And I made a new character with the same name on the server, so no one else could take it. It was that precious to me. And I've got a good story about how that process of deleting my online avatar was. But I digress.
Yeah, because you were just sort of making yourself sound like some sort of interstellar drug smuggler who had to keep his identity private.
Well, I was a capsuleer and pod pilot and spaceman. That's EVE Online in a nutshell.
But these compulsive behaviors added into sort of like a growing sort of discomfort and sense of pain that came really to a word I like to use is fulcrum. Have you ever heard of the word fulcrum before?
Now you're just making up words.
No. Fulcrum. It means like when something comes to a head.
You mean a tipping point?
Exactly, a tipping point, which
Okay.
would be a way more normal thing to say. But for some reason, I just had the compulsion, not just now, but a few minutes ago, to say fulcrum. but once I reviewed the audio,
Fulcrum.
fulcrum.
Yeah,
Once it
good.
almost sounds wrong, but back to the serious matter at hand.
Uh-huh.
Now, so you already described some of these symptoms.
Right.
Can you tell us like how it's affected your life and how and what the not only the physical symptoms but like the mental health as well? I'd like to hear about that as well for the record.
Okay, I'll try to put it succinctly. So, what I was hinting at with all the gaming stuff, I mentioned depression. I started experiencing that senior year of high school, and you can say 8-10 personality. My background is Guatemalan, Mayan, Cachiquel, from Guatemala. Obviously from my mother's side, and my father is European. He's German Jewish. His father escaped the Holocaust with his immediate family just before the war, and he is also a mix of English, and he grew up in New Jersey after being born in Canada. So I'm actually first generation American. I look very Latino, kind of indigenous, Central American. I sometimes get mistaken for being Indian or Pakistani from that area. But no, I'm, I suppose you could say mixed race and multi-ethnic. So that plays some role, some factor in my pushing myself so hard in that I really wanted to make it, achieve scholastically, and go to a college of my choosing, let's say. So I went to Brown University, and things were okay for a while, but with the winters and the challenges of my classes, and I discovered EVE Online with my gaming computer. One of the worst mistakes my parents made was to give me a super powered laptop replacement laptop, very heavy,
I see.
which enabled me to play EVE Online when I discovered that, which was free to play. Wait, at the time? No, it wasn't at the time. I paid a subscription, but it wasn't that much for a broke college student. And so what I'm getting at is I've started suffering in a very visceral way end of high school. And eventually I had to leave on 2 different times, and I'm currently on leave from Brown, although I intend to return and complete my degree. That's a whole other story. So that still happens, you know. I've learned through having depression, hypomania, mania, and other psychiatric labels you could put for moods and perception of reality and such, interpretation of reality. But the bottom line is I had some training in how to keep myself stable, and not only stable, but to enjoy life and heal from different dips and highs. So unfortunately, the pain is a different story though, because pain is so like unignorable.
Yeah.
It is so, well, to use a word, present. It really makes you experience what is happening right now with your body.
Well said.
But also the frustration of not being able to get rid of it or not knowing what is wrong. I spent a lot of my salary money from that position after I left to just get a doctor's opinion and get healed and get the right medicine. Like,
really?
What do I do? And it was very useless. Basically did almost everything that wasn't good. Immediately when I went to the doctor the first time I had chronic pain, they gave me tramadol, which is an opiate, and physical therapy, which was like, you know, a little bit every week. And I had to do the other exercises on my own, which I did and didn't do. But overall, it wasn't enough. And I continued gaming, and the pain persisted. So, you know, what do? Take more pills? Do you like physical therapy more? I mean, one of those answers is correct.
Yeah.
But I was like glued to the computer, and I didn't want to exercise and go out, and that would have to mean meeting people. And I started smoking pot, not just for pain, but to make my computer games even more intense,
right?
And
more immersive.
To lose myself into the computer more and get hypersexual and all sorts of other stuff. So.
And chronic pain can do that to you. Like I'm just identifying with what you're saying, because I mentioned earlier in the podcast that I have gone through a spinal fusion operation. And the reason why I had that was because I had a scoliosis that was a curve like you wouldn't believe. And
I have a little bit of that.
the reason why I had that, and that can actually do real pain to you because the spine is a weight-bearing object. It's designed to like bear a lot of weight. But I was going through so much chronic pain that they also prescribed me an opiate. But it wasn't tramadol. It ended up being OxyContin, which is, the bad boy of the pharmaceutical industry. And I loved it, and I got very addicted. And the consequences of chronic pain are far-reaching, and when you add meds into the situation, it can get real harrowing. But one thing I really do admire about Nathanael sitting here, I think maybe we should try to do about 10 more minutes, and then I would say this has been like a real solid and successful recording with minimal fuck-ups and minimal...
You allowed to say that? Fuck-ups?
In post, my man. I can go back and I can just make you sound like Marlon Brando, so... No.
I prefer Harrison Ford.
Okay, and in case you will be Harrison Ford, I will be Chewbacca. See, and my bad jokes, I can also cut those out in post too if I learn how. But I don't want to get off track. But I did want to say, like, you have introduced me to a different realm of self-care, and I wish that I followed the beautiful and helpful advice that you gave me more often, because I find like the things that you're talking about, like isolating. For me, it's not so much playing video games, but it would just be accessing internet content, whether that's reading. I do a ton of reading. I read every news site that you've heard of. I read every tweet. I read thousands of tweets a day, just soaking up the internet. And it's funny, like, there's actually a couple of things I wanted to sound off on what you just said. But I don't know, has anyone ever been like refreshing YouTube or scrolling Twitter and just felt so empty inside, or Facebook? I don't know, does anybody else feel this? Like, not just us, but anyone listening, like, comment below if you do. Like, do you ever feel like this? Because I feel like the internet gives so much, and it stimulates us so much that it puts us in this weird state where we need to be constantly stimulated. And that's not really like a novel observation, but I think it is interesting where it's like the thirst that cannot be quenched eventually, because you're conditioned to just always be entertained and amused. But it's like, really, how entertaining or amusing can YouTube be after you've, lazy Sunday afternoon, you've been watching it for 2-3 hours already? So it's like something in your brain is going to go off that's like, hey, go outside or make a meal or go talk to a girl or something to that effect.
Yeah, you describe something that has become almost universal in global culture, and that is what I call the tyranny of the 2D screen, which has now easily become what they call virtual reality, even more immersive. So yeah, you said basically overstimulation with simulation, with simulacrum.
Nice.
And simulacrum roughly means a construct to not only simulate something else that isn't real in itself, at least the thing that it's simulating, but also the simulation is so convincing it is that thing.
Whoa.
It's like a perfect copy. So I mentioned virtual reality because I tried out a job at a virtual reality arcade.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and...
in the city, in San Francisco?
It was in Emeryville.
Oh, okay.
And I basically got a day of just helping people experience it with their headset, and then when there were no customers, I got to play. So I ended up not taking the job, even though I wanted to.
Was it in a mall?
Outdoor mall. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because I actually went to one of those things in Las Vegas with Gone.
So that was my second...
But you didn't do it. You didn't take the job. So.
No. That was my second experience with virtual reality, but at this time it was at a length, and I played shooters, and I played had a cooking bacon and stuff. Simulator, and I did one where you threw a stick for a robot dog. It was kind of in the style of...
Wow, robot dog, eh?
Yeah. So I what I'm getting at is I very much experienced that, and it was, if you are familiar at all with the Greek philosophy about being stuck in a cave and seeing shadows on the wall caused by light from a candle, let's say, and not understanding how that phenomena is created, you might think there's a whole other world you couldn't directly see.
Whoa.
And you might think the shadows are something divine, or maybe you would figure out it's a simulation of shadow. It could be confusing. But then that's your whole life. And then one day you're out of the cave. And now you don't see shadows. You see what makes the shadows.
Whoa.
So...
that was deep. That was really
deep.
profound. I like that.
So I came out of the shadows, let's say, out of my cave that was being in my room at the simulacrum that I preferred, the reality I preferred, that I consumed through the computer screen. And in that universe, I was not experiencing pain. I was in flow. I was joyful. I got to play amongst the stars in a starfighter, and I was highly valued as a team member. I exercised leadership as a squadron leader, and
So this is like
it was amazing.
Truly a supplementary form of existence. And then just to come in real quick, and this is just to tie it back. I remember we've been talking for almost an hour. To tie it back to something I referenced right at the beginning was Logan Paul's podcast, where he was talking with his friend Dwarf Mamba, Evan, who had some mental health issues. And the way that they staged that podcast was almost like an intervention. But what they were talking about was, believe it or not, his video game addiction. So isn't that interesting how they say, they all live in this house, Logan Paul's house, and Evan is part of the YouTube content, and he's a comedian in his own right. But apparently he's been really obsessed with video games to where it's not only where people are saying, hey, like this guy games a lot, or this guy's a real gamer. It's to the point where it's literally being confronted in the same tone and same sort of way that you would approach someone who is a drug addict or some... Go ahead.
To that callback, that person is the person who has dwarfism, right?
That's right.
Yeah, so...
same thing, right? He gets a whole different stimuli from a world where he's not inhibited.
And you can be a different person. You can be a different reality. In some games, you can role play as a different person, all sorts of things, which is certainly what I did. I called myself by a different name, and I had a different, I'd say, persona, even though it was me, obviously. But I wanted to finish, to get back to what the story, how I first met you. The thing I said, the first thing that you perhaps hesitated to say because it was so direct, but when I first saw you, pretty much, I saw your cane, and I saw how you walked. And I immediately said something like, does that hurt? And I pointed to your leg or to your body. And
that's right. That was the first thing you said to me, or outside of our introductions or whatever, our brief introductions. And then soon after, you opened up about what you were going through.
Right.
And you sort of confided in me about your diagnosis that you had recently received, and you were really processing that and going through it in the moment. And it was just such a raw... I feed off of that. I love that because so many people, they put up such a front and such a a fake guise, and this guy Nathanael is just real. And I think go ahead.
Well, I had to be transparent about it because I was in so much pain, having just left that coding school job. I was burnt out. And somebody finally gave me the vocabulary I needed to understand what was wrong with me. They said fibromyalgia and chronic pain and fatigue. That's the other part, is that I burned out so much that I didn't have the energy to work. That's why I went to part-time at a summer camp. And I also had trouble thinking. I had a lot of brain fog, and there was so much pain in my body. It was so distracting. My moods were very difficult to sustain a good mood. Even though I'd had some success and I conquered depression, even though I have some slidebacks here and there, doing very well at the moment.
That's so awesome. You seem better, honestly. Because sometimes, I think the last time you visited me, just from the first few seconds of looking at you, I knew that you weren't necessarily in a good way. And
and I just went from a full-time to a part-time again, so summer camps.
Exactly.
That season,
but just the way you were looking today and just your general energy seems like you're doing much better. And this is not, it might be the end of the podcast, but this is not the end of the conversation.
Right.
And I think this has gone well between Nathanael, where I could safely say next time he visited, or maybe tomorrow we could do another one, or something to that effect of continuing the conversation of our strategies for resilience and our strategies for self-care and how we defy the obstacles, the challenges, and to be quite honest, the real difficulties. And now I'm just sort of airballing it because I'm trying to sound
Grandiose, perhaps.
grandiose to finish up the podcast. It doesn't necessarily have to end on a clean 60-minute break, but I did want to thank you for coming on to my new show today, and I think
Glad to be here.
There's a lot of room to run here, as far as having this conversation, and I have 10 episodes. This could be like the introductory episode. If all goes well, you'll be listening to this on YouTube. There's going to be some clouds in the background. There's going to be an audio waveform that I'm going to edit. It's all going to look very cool. I have it planned out. But after this episode, I'm going to have 10 episodes planned out. And like I said, this is not just a vehicle for me to blab on about my life or complain about my existence or talk about myself. I also want it to be interactive. So if you have a struggle, if you've overcome challenges, I want to hear from you. So comment below, send me a message, send me an email. I'll leave that information in the description. Nathanael, do you have any parting words for us before I press the stop recording button?
I do, so thank you. Thank you so much for asking, Kit. I have a question, just one question. Referring to your surgeries in the past, the kind of metal they use, was it adamantium or was it something else?
I don't know if it's adamantium, but it's certainly enough to set off a metal detector.
Metal detector.
So metal detectors don't like me, but it's all right. You know, I do often go around telling people that I am Wolverine or I'm somewhat Wolverine, but just to end on a real wacky note, I always thought that if the robots rise up and overtake humanity, they may not spare you because you're just flesh and blood, but perhaps they will scan me and see that I have this metal inside of me, and perhaps in my wildest dreams I would become somewhat of a cyborg prince. Like they would take me in and I would assist them with the destruction of everybody else. That's completely a joke, but I will not lie, that is one of my very dark fantasies that I enjoy. That's the magic of the audio, the podcast format, is you could just say anything and you could just cut it right out.
You could say almost anything except for the thing that you're actually saying.
That's right. In this case, I might actually leave that part in because it adds to the humor of the situation.
I get it.
But you know what? It's our first try at a podcast. It's really not so bad, is it? I actually felt like this really had legs, like, to be honest. So this is a lot of fun to do. All right, we'll close out now. It's called the Defying Yourself podcast. Subscribe. Send me a comment. We love you. Thank you so much for listening.